So I'm going to start with a poem, a new poem of mine that sort of speaks to this, and that'll lead me into a discussion of restorative mutuality. Love your brother. Wearing baggy Calvin Klein sweats and a hoodie that read, "Protect your freedom," with photos of Lincoln and Washington in that order, so much for history, as his wisps of hair flew in the wind and he ordered his vanilla latte and quizzed the barista on pastry, not a cookie, outside the coffee shop. I wondered who he thought was a threat. Driving shoes and skinny ankle bones, fidgeting into my 6-foot bubble of safety, no mask over his stubble. The little man, I could lift him in a bear hug, waltz him to safety. I could have laid a soothing hand on his troubled brow, except for forgetting to see everyone as a human form of God until now, when I write this to atone. We see people today, and often the messages that they send with their clothing or their bumper stickers or whatever sometimes can put us in a mood for some restorative mutuality. So restorative mutuality, like all of the 3 petals of the Trillium teachings, contains and reflects all the other petals. This is true for me. What I love about the Trillium Awakening symbol, the flower of the Trillium, is that there's a way in which you could say the center point out of which the petals blossom is the ground of being, right? Consciousness, relatedness, and embodiment, right? And that they all sort of contain each other in their own way. And I'll say more about that as we go on to talk about what restorative mutuality is in practice. So from the glossary on the Trillium page, here's the definition of restorative mutuality. So I'm going to read the definition as it is, and then I'm going to go through it a second time and sort of parse it out phrase by phrase to sort of enlarge on what what it means to me, and I think how it comes into play in our lives. When practicing restorative mutuality, we are sensitive to our effects upon the other. We are open to listening to accounts of hurt resulting from how our words or actions are perceived, even if we didn't intend harm. We take responsibility for making amends in the spirit of honoring our divine connection with the other person. We offer a heartfelt apology or other restorative action without necessarily believing we did anything wrong. We authentically regret that our words or actions have impacted the other in that way. Practicing restorative mutuality does not entail violating one's own boundaries or limits. Okay, so that's the well-framed definition of restorative mutuality. I think takes us to another layer, another level from where we were with coconut yoga, which was the term that we had inherited from Waking Down. And so I want to break that down and sort of parse it out part by part. So it starts off, when practicing restorative mutuality, we are sensitive to our effects upon the other. So the key word in that phrase for me is the other, right? So that means that we're aware that there is an other who is a manifestation of consciousness. So this could be really useful. This is something I learned early on in going to sittings in this work was, Ralph is a manifestation of consciousness in this moment. Elizabeth is a manifestation of consciousness in this moment. Fred is a manifestation of consciousness in this moment. This is consciousness showing up as Fred, as Kathleen, as Maria, as Subhaga, right? So there's the core of consciousness, and then there's the manifestation of consciousness showing up as each of us in our individual way. And we often say that the other is essentially a sealed mystery, right? We only know the other in the moment as they are arising. So the same way that consciousness is manifesting itself in its arising moment by moment, by moment, by moment, each individual person that we come into contact with is doing the same thing, right? So that's what I love about that phrase, sealed mystery. We see them and we can perceive things from them, but we can only know them in the moment, and knowing is always partial. One of the other hats I wear is I teach community college, and one of the topics I teach or courses I teach is interpersonal communication, which I really quite love. And one of the main tenets in interpersonal communication is cultivating what we call other orientation. And other orientation means that we, to the best of our ability, We live our lives with the realization that every other that we meet has his or her own, has their own goals, conditions, patterning, mystery, conflicts. So they're like us. They're like us, but at an extension, at a remove. So when we go through the world with that other orientation attuned, then we are naturally more sensitive to our effects on the other. Okay, so the second phrase, we're open to listening to accounts of hurt resulting from how our words or actions were perceived, even if we didn't intend harm. So the important thing here is that we're open to listening, right? Everybody's heard the definition of conversation, which is waiting for your turn to talk, right? This is not how we work in mutuality. In mutuality, we practice deep listening. And so through that deep listening, we're able to open ourselves up. We're not planning what to say or how to explain what we did. So, and hurts that result from our words or action are real and alive in the other. That's what's arising in the moment, that what we have said or done has somehow caused some sense of harm. And one of the key things too in here is that intention is neither here nor there, right? In communication, it's not our intention that people receive, it's our message that people receive. The words, the tone of voice, the facial expression, the gestures. So our intentions may be one thing, but the message is what people receive. And so in restorative mutuality, we have to sort of start from that point of view. It's not what we intended, it's what the other person received. It's what they heard, right, or took in. Marshall McLuhan said the medium is the message, right? So the words and what they say and what they convey are actually, one and the same with the medium. There's a really great quote from the German philosopher Martin Heidegger that I use a lot in my teaching, my college teaching. It's a little complex, but it bears saying here. What is spoken is never, and in no language, what is said. What is spoken is never, and in no language, what is said. Right? So there's a way in which, in human communication, we're always sort of like this, right? We're speaking the same language, we're all speaking English, let's say, but our meanings can just pass each other. And so when we practice restorative mutuality, we're really bringing ourselves to that place of realizing, oh, the other person is another who has their own way of understanding. That's not necessarily the same as mine. Okay, when practicing restorative mutuality, we're sensitive to our effects upon the other. We're open to listening to accounts of hurt resulting from how our words or actions were perceived, even if we didn't intend harm. We take responsibility for making amends. Okay, so I'm going to sort of stop there, actually. I'm going to stop at we take responsibility. So Alan Morlock, who was my first teacher in this work, had this wonderful analogy for what we mean by responsibility. So you probably have your computer sitting on a table right now, right? Or maybe you have a cup of tea or a glass of water sitting on the table. So the table is responsible for your computer or the glass of water, right? Once it lands there, it's up to the table to hold it. But the table didn't cause it to be there, right? The table didn't cause it to be there. So when we respond, to take responsibility is to respond. And in Latin, the word respond means to pledge or to be answerable to another. So we take responsibility for what has happened. So the harm has come from what we have said or done, but it's not so much that we have to feel like, oh, this is my fault, so I did something wrong, but the recognition, okay, this landed in a way that was harmful for the other. So we take responsibility for making amends in the spirit of honoring our divine connection with the other person. So this takes us back to the whole nature of the other, right? If we're gonna make amends in the spirit of honoring our divine connection with the other person, we have to recognize the other person as non-separate from us. We have to recognize the other person as divinely human as we are, right? So they are just, I love where I live here in North Central Washington, we have a lot of aspen trees, and aspen trees really demonstrate this quite beautifully because there's one system of roots and all these aspen trees are growing up out of it, right? Wherever you have one, you never have one aspen tree, usually. You have a number of aspens and they're all growing out of the same network, right? Mycelium, right? What's connecting everything in the world to everything else. And so that divine connection with the other person is central to this restorative mutuality. So what we feel when another is injured is an injury to ourselves, right? Because we have caused harm. And because we are not separate, if we can really drop in and be fully present in the moment in a situation like this, then we can feel that, and we feel it as compassion. We're separate in the relative sense, right? Each of us has our own identity, gender, race, ethnicity, likes, dislikes, political affiliations, especially important right now. But in the absolute sense, we are all manifestations of consciousness. And the word amend, which has its roots in both Latin and Sanskrit, but has relatively the same meaning, which means without fault, right? To amend, to take away the fault or remove the fault. So when we make amends, that's what we're doing. We're saying taking back the harm. We offer a heartfelt apology or other restorative action without necessarily believing we did anything wrong. We authentically regret that our words or actions have impacted the other in that way. Practicing restorative mutuality does not entail violating one's own boundaries or limits. So apologizing from a place that is not about blame is really important. Like, we can make a heartfelt apology if we can be in mutuality with another and be present with conflict and recognize, okay, I hear you, that this thing I said or did, or my tone of voice or whatever, was hurtful to you. It's not about my intention. I don't have to feel like this was a wrong. What I feel is the hurt in the other. And it's the hurt in the other to which I respond, to which we respond. So we can apologize from our hearts. There's an activity I have my students do in interpersonal communication about whether it's useful to teach children rote apology, right? As we know, children have to be taught compassion, right? We don't come in, this is not baked in compassion. It's a skill that we develop over time. And for children, it can be very difficult to apologize, right? Because children typically, they don't have the skill set for that. And so, we have a discussion around this in my class. Is it useful to have teach children to just do the rote apology? And the drawback with that is that for some of us, that's what gets baked in, right? Saying that, oh, sorry. The British are often mocked for that, way they have of saying sorry, without really having any feeling behind it. So we can, when we do practice restorative mutuality, what we're dropping into is the fact that we sense that we've caused harm. We drop into the feeling of that. And that's where the apology comes from. Not from what we said or did, but I see that I've caused you harm and I am sorry for that. It was not my intention. So restorative mutuality is not about ourselves, it's about the other. And then I'm just going to say a couple more things and then we'll sort of open it up. Because restorative justice, which is where this new definition comes from, really has quite ancient roots. And you might be familiar with the Hawaiian ho'oponopono, which is both a prayer and a ritual. And I did a little research on this today, but it's very interesting. This ho'oponopono prayer or ritual has its roots actually in the healing of illness. In ancient Hawaii, the belief was basically that illness came from unatoned harm. And so that the ho'oponopono, this restorative justice, corrects, restores, and maintains good relationships among family members and with their gods or God by getting to the causes and sources of trouble. Usually the most senior member of the family gathers the family together. The process begins with prayer, a statement of the problem, a discussion of the transgression. Family members are expected to work through and cooperate, not hold fast to the fault. One or more periods of silence may be taken for reflection on the entanglement of emotions and injuries. Everyone's feelings are acknowledged. then confession, repentance, or forgiveness, and forgiveness take place. Everyone releases each other, letting go. They cut off the past and close the event with a ceremonial feast. Today in Hawaii, this is started to be used as an alternative dispute resolution in legal cases, where they'll assign an elder to the parties, and that person will work them through this Ho'oponopono ritual. The Ho'oponopono prayer is really simple but very profound, and it's a great model to use for restorative mutuality. I'm sorry, forgive me, I love you, thank you. And so that's kind of our restorative mutuality in a nutshell.